Hello and welcome. My name is Ben Kickert, and today I'll be presenting on some work that I've been doing with a group known as SDG Counting. The title of my presentation is Advanced Data Capturing Using WebSession. By way of introduction, let me speak a little bit about what SDG Counting is. SDG Counting is a group comprised of 3 individuals across the United States. I'm based in North Carolina. Maureen Baer, who will present later today, is working out of the New York City area, and Kenneth Blake is in Atlanta. Ultimately, our group are advocates for the UN Sustainable Development Goals. If you're not familiar, the SDGs are a global roadmap for how to make the world a better place, covering 17 different goals, including everything from quality education to improved health outcomes, improved economic stability, gender empowerment are all part of the SDGs. Specifically, our team is interested in how the data flows within these SDGs. How is it being collected, analyzed, reported on? But most importantly, how can data be used to utilize actual work? How can we make the world better by using data to do that? As a note, our entire team also has an interest in the role that AI can play in this work. How can we use AI to be more efficient? How can technology in general make the work of global development more effective? Now, the United Nations, which oversees the SDGs, is an interesting entity. Last I checked, I believe there's 130,000 different employees, and every year they put out thousands of pages of resources, documents, dashboards, data sets. There's an abundance of information that's widely available. It's free for use. It's available to be accessed in a number of ways. But unfortunately, because of the quantity of data, it's often hard to find the answers that you're specifically looking for. The UN itself is aware of this issue. Just in the last couple months, they've launched what's called the UN 80 initiative, which in celebration, I guess, of their 80th anniversary, they're looking at ways that they can improve their efficiency by tracking what it is that they're mandated to do and how their data is flowing. Specifically, they're looking at implementing AI into handling these large amounts of data. So as a team, our idea is to be able to check to see what's possible with the existing information that we have and see what might be possible for the UN to include at a larger level. So for today, specifically what we're going to be looking at is some of the built-in tools in Wolfram for interacting with web content. This is largely centered around WebSession and WebExecute. And then we're going to discuss how those tools can be used to improve your own workflows, primarily AI, maybe building a RAG database, doing more detailed analysis with code, or perhaps you just want a more focused query that you can ask ChatGPT, here's a list of 1,000 reports, which one should I read? We're going to look at some of those practical examples. Looking at the documentation for Wolfram for the WebSession and WebExecute, it includes what you need to know. What we want to do is give you some examples of how you can use it. I will say that in this presentation, the code is relatively straightforward, but it is going to assume that you have at least a basic understanding of HTML and CSS. But if it's been a while since you took your last basic web design course, I'll try to move slowly on those parts. So what WebSession and WebExecute are commands built within the Wolfram language that allow Mathematica or other Wolfram language tools to interact directly with your browser. This can be everything from importing all of the hyperlinks on a page to extracting and interacting with specific elements. We find this is much more useful because it's more versatile than using kind of a blunt tool like import, and you want to bring in all of the source or all of the plain text. For those of you that also code in JavaScript, WebExecute allows you to execute JavaScript commands, which are greatly going to increase the possibilities that you have. And the reason we're interested in this is because a lot of our work in data cleaning, data structuring, data analysis uses the Wolfram language. And by incorporating things like WebExecute into our workflow, we're able to import the information and clean it in the same time. I've included a link to the documentation. But let's start with just a very basic example. It's been a couple of years. I think 2019 is when this functionality was first introduced. And so if this is not something on your radar, let's look at how these tools work. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to start a web session. And that is going to bring up a browser on my second monitor. And then what I want to do is open a web page. In this case, what I'm looking at is a live schedule of all the live streams that the United Nations will be doing today. So using WebExecute, the first thing, the simplest thing is simply to bring in all of the page hyperlinks. And because they're using a standard format for the URL, if we ask for only the hyperlinks that include the asset folder, we get a list of the 39 live stream links that, that we can view. Continuing with that, if you want to interact with specific elements, let's say instead of just the links to the live streams, we want to know all of the titles, we can use WebExecute, locate elements, and then use a CSS selector, which we'll talk more about in a bit, and say, give me all of the elements that are a level 4 heading. That's going to return a list, in this case, of web element objects. If we then nest that and use WebExecute and pull the element text, what we end up with, let me do the first one first, is a list of all of the titles that of the sessions that will be shown today. Again, if you want to use JavaScript, this is something that we use regularly. Let's say you need to scroll down a page because the website's using Ajax. You can use JavaScript to automatically scroll your window and include that as part of the base functions within WebExecute. There's also a feature that was first documented in 13.1, and that's the ability to extract a specific attribute from an element that you've already identified. In this case, because all of the A tags within H4 are going to be the titles of the sessions that we're interested in following, we can extract both the text as well as the link. So all of that is in one spot. Let's move to the next page. So what would a hypothetical use case for this simple example be? Let's say that instead of just bringing in the titles and the links, we also want to bring in things like the times and the descriptions for the live stream. This would allow us to set up a daily scheduled task that would look at what options were available for us today. We could feed that into an LLM and say, based on this list of live streams, what is it that I should pay attention to? If you want to build that out more, you could have that result emailed to you. And essentially, by using WebExecute, you can have a daily scrape of all of the most important things that then use AI to be able to prioritize. Now, this is a tool that I would say we use weekly, if not daily, within our workflow. And when you're using a tool frequently, you're often looking for ways that you can streamline the process. This is some code that we've used, just simply looking at the base code for pulling in the text of, say, the title. You realize that it takes up to 83 characters just to get the title of the website. That's a bit much for us. And so what we've done is we've created some shortcut functions that allow us to write CSS H1, and that's going to bring in all of the H1 tags. The same thing for the CSS text. If we want to extract an attribute, we've got shorthand for that defaults to href because we most frequently use it with links. With Ajax websites, often we're wanting to scroll multiple times, so we have code for that. And then for the super lazy, simply opening up a page, clicking on a link, or pulling in the links, we also have a shorthand for. You don't have to use this, but the reason I include it is because in the rest of the presentation, I do point to these things. A quick primer on CSS selectors, if it's been a while since your last HTML course. CSS selectors are a way of identifying different elements on a website. I've included a link to the W3 Schools documentation because I think it's the most straightforward way to figure out how to identify specific elements. For people who are more familiar with XML, you can also use XPath, but CSS allows you to have a creative combination to be able to identify groups of elements as well as individual elements. So if we go back to that CSS code that we discussed earlier, if I want to extract all of the H1 headings, if I put H1 as the argument within that code, it's going to return everything within the website that has a H1 heading. If elements within a website have a specifically defined ID, you can use the hashtag the same way you would an anchor within a link and extract all of those elements. The most common way that we identify the elements that we want is by a combination of tags and then the classes, which are often used for visualization and for formatting. But if the argument you put into your locate elements code is div followed by a period and then the class, so this might be something like div.main is going to give you all the text within the main division of that page. Using multiple periods allows you to specify multiple classes. You can also use CSS to identify where within the structure of a website an element lists. And so if I want a link that's immediately within a paragraph, that's immediately within a span, that's immediately within a division, the arrows can do that. Otherwise, if I want every paragraph within a division, that can be handled with a space. One of the not as common uses, but has come in handy for us, is the ability to find elements based on specific tags besides class. ARIA labels is an interesting one. If you're not familiar, ARIA is an assistive technology that gives titles to specific elements for things like e-readers or voice dictation of a website. And often if you say, I want the ARIA label of this, it's going to give you a very specific element within that. There's also specific syntax you can use within CSS in order to further define what elements you want to extract. So for instance, if I want to find the main division of a page, and within that, any span at any level, find that, then give me the second paragraph, and then within that, give me any links that have an ARIA label of home, that's the code that you would use. I find, and we'll look at this in a second, that using Inspector within your browser is the best way to figure out what it is from a website that you may want to extract. Now, that is a lot of talking, so let's try to put it into action, and I'll try to show you an example. At this point, I'm going to end my presentation so that you can actually see what we've got going on. Okay, so let's start a website, or start a web session and open up a specific website. In this case, what we've chosen is the SDG's Actions Platform, which is a list of over 8,000 different activities that are taking place to support and extend the work of the Sustainable Development Goals. So if you look, we've got everything from government programs to activities that NGOs are doing. Academic institutions can submit the work that they're doing. Philanthropic organizations can include that. So we're interested in this because this is a repertoire of all sorts of actions across the globe, and we want to encourage this type of work. So the first thing we might want to do is be able to identify each one of these pages. So we can use our hyperlinks command, and we realize that on this page, there are 18 different activities. If we wanted to, we could also cycle through all of these pages and end up with a list of those 8,000 links. But for example, let's just bring up one of these activities, in this case, the Blue Water Institute. Now, for us as a team at SDG Counting, what we would want to be able to do is take the data that was included on these 8,000 pages and structure it in such a way that we can better understand not just what's out there, but we can actually analyze to find trends and figure out what is happening. So by pulling the information from this UN website, putting it into a different format, we're able to draw better conclusions and improve our ability to advocate for the work that we're interested in. So in this case, unfortunately, I apologize, the coloring is not great. But if I want to extract this title, the first thing I'm going to do is right click on it, and I'm going to click inspect. And then if you right click on it again and click inspect again, that's going to take you into the source code, and it's going to show you exactly where this element is located within the page. A hidden feature within the Chrome inspector feature, I guess it's a nested feature, is if you come into copy and you click copy selector, I'll just paste it up here, it'll actually show you the simplest version of a CSS selector that will get you to this point. And so if we put this into our WebExecute locate elements tool, we're always going to return this title. But the thing is often you don't need this full title. In this case, there's the first H1 is always going to be what you want. And so if we're trying to pull in information to put it into a structured format, the first thing we want to have is the title. The next thing that we're interested in is what sort of entity is this? In this case, we've got a non-governmental organization. At this point, if I were building this from scratch for the first time, I would be looking at how these things are structured, specifically with the classes. And so here we know that the information for non-governmental organization is a class of field content within a larger division that includes this field entity types. And so to bring that in, the most straightforward code in this case would be identifying that initial class, because this division is giving that information, and then pulling in the child information. So we know now that it is an NGO. Continuing down and looking at some of the other information that's available, we have a timeline. When is this project starting? When is it expected to end? We can use similar definitions of the division and then do some quick string cleaning, string manipulation to be able to extract our start and end dates. Same way, knowing that the list of goals that this works with is available within the links of a specific division. We have that. And then now for one that's a little bit more creative, all of the action websites have a website for more information. Sometimes they have multiple links within this. Being able to identify which link is actually pointing to what we want ended up being a relatively complicated process, because often the links were not unique in the way the CSS selector was structured. So this is the point where we were able to use that attributes tag. And one of the things that you identify, and you find this by going through the HTML and CSS, is that in this case, the hyperlink out includes a target of _blank, which if you're familiar with HTML means that it opens in a new tab. And by saying, give me all of the links that include that, it's kind of a shortcut that gets us to the link that we want. I struggle with setting up presentations like this, or even explaining how CSS selectors can work, because the reality is that every website is going to be developed in a different way. And because of that, it's going to always require a lot of time spent digging through this information. So my goal for today is to hopefully jumpstart some ideas about how you can use these things. An interesting thing that we've added later in our process of using WebExecute is actually being able to click on links. In a case like this, we have multiple tabs within a page. We know that the resource tab is only visible after you click on it. And so one of the things that we can do as we're cycling through this information is find that resource tab and then be able to click on it. We'll click on it first, and then we'll extract the information. And so if you're building a scrape function to be able to pull this information in, oftentimes you're going to have to interact with the page itself. And so I'm gonna end it there for this example. But what would we end up using this type of thing for? Within our team, we've already said we want to be able to analyze the trends and commitments. Which SDGs are getting the most attention? How has it changed over time? Are we continuing to get commitments? Are people sticking with their commitments? Are people turning in progress reports? But probably most importantly, because there's such a multitude of information, we want to be able to make sure that we're not missing anything exciting that needs to be publicized. Okay, second example. I want to take a look, and this is going to bring up a new structure. This is a slightly different setup. We want to use the same process of using CSS selectors to get the information into a computable source. What we're looking at now is a list of all of the data contacts for every indicator within the SDGs. This is kind of the nitty-gritty of how data management works within the United Nations and within the SDGs. And so, for instance, within Goal 1, we have different targets and then different indicators. And so if you want to know the proportion of the population living below the international poverty line, disaggregated by sex, age, and employment status, by looking at this website, we know that Stephen from the International Labor Organization, who's the head of data production, he's the guy who knows everything about that. This is very valuable information for us because it allows us to track data from the clinic level all the way up to the UN AIDS report. Now, the reason that I'm showing this example is because it is an example of data that is well structured in terms of being able to visually see what's happening. But what it isn't is structured in a way that is simple for importing elements based on CSS selectors. So here what you find is that we have a list of all the indicators. Most indicators only have one data contact. Many of these actually have multiple data contacts. And within it, we have a wealth of information, such as the name, their email address, their phone number, if we want to get in contact with them. But none of these include unique CSS selectors to allow us to pull that in. So this is a case where we would want to switch the way we do things. And instead of relying only on CSS selectors, we would instead want to do more string and list manipulation. So in this case, I'm not going to run it because it does take a little while. You find that if you pull in all of the divisions, what we end up with is a division for the indicator and then divisions for each individual card. And so rather than trying to say, give me all div dot indicator dot heading, we can say, give me the whole list, and then I can sort the list out as I go. Using that, we can use things like string contains to be able to find all of the data cards and separate that. We can separate the indicators out so that we know we now have a list from a list of all divisions. We now have a list of the indicators and a list of the contact cards. Then using something like split by and partition, we can regroup things. And so the reason I'm showing this is because oftentimes trying to have a CSS driven approach is not going to lead to the cleanest results. And instead, you're much better using list manipulation to be able to get where you want. Because this is a one-off, and because a lot of this involves, finding a line that includes agency or finding a line that includes title, this is not going to be universally applicable. But the big takeaway for me is that you're not always going to end up with clean options, and you're often going to have to utilize Wolfram to be able to do that. So for us, by running through this code, what we end up with is a list of all the indicators, all of the contact names, all of the agencies, who's responsible for it, contact information, websites. And then I'm going to jump back into my presentation at that point. So how would we use this information? As a team, SDG Counting is interested in how SDG data is being gathered, who's making the decisions, how it's flowing. And so by creating a data set, we now have access to all of the contact information for the people who are making these decisions. Specifically, something that's coming up recently, UN AIDS is an organization that is responsible for tracking all of the HIV data. We've recently been informed that division is going to be shut down. And so before the end of the 2030 agenda, when the SDGs are scheduled to come to completion, we know that the entity responsible for tracking that data is no longer going to be available. And so now we have the contact to be able to advocate to ensure that data continues. We've also used this for things like being able to batch process using LLMs and web search to find social media accounts, so we can make sure that we're listening to the people who are making the decision. I see I've only got about 6 minutes left, and so I want to give a few final thoughts and hopefully have a minute or two available for Q&A. I've given you 2 examples or 3 examples of how our team has used WebExecute and WebSession to be able to take web data and put it to use, to be able to structure things in a way that can be used more efficiently in LLMs or also a standard Wolfram manipulation for analysis. You can do it. You're going to have to find your use cases as well. Some things that come to mind that I've used it for personally: archiving websites. Maybe you created a website in something like Dreamweaver, which no longer exists, and so you don't have the data behind it. You can use WebExecute to be able to extract your own information. Let's say you want to build a data set for RAG so that you can take web-based data and search it automatically and feed that into an LLM. That could also work. You can use these tools to have a daily monitoring of websites so that you can track changes. Let's say you're interested in the price of coffee. Being able to use WebExecute to open up a website and pull in that information, or any automation in general on public websites. I will have a quick note about the importance of operating ethically and legally while using tools like this. The reason that we showed the UN data today is because a thorough reading of the terms of service says that that this data is publicly available and is available for consumption and automation. We will regularly check robots.txt or the metadata related to robots to ensure that scraping is allowed. Depending on the website you're accessing, not only for ethical reasons, but also for functionality, you might want to throttle your requests to ensure that you're not loading 5,000 pages in 30 seconds in order to get the information you want, and ensuring that you continue to treat your data with respect. A quick note on the future of these tools. I believe this is the third year that we have talked about how Wolfram tools can be utilized for working with LLMs. Every single presentation we've given within a month, a significant portion of what we've discussed becomes outdated because of the speed at which this field is emerging. I imagine the same thing will happen with some of these WebExecute pieces. On one hand, context windows are continuing to increase. Tools for supplementing knowledge, such as web search, are also becoming more commonplace. And in kind of the cat and mouse game, web content is constantly becoming more guarded due to concerns on how training data is gathered and utilized. But I'm always going to encourage you to hold on to your own data. As for what's next for us, we're going to continue to track how UN data is being counted and monitored. Given that a lot of data sets that we assumed would always be available suddenly became unavailable in the last 12 months, being able to download and archive essential public data is a task that we think is important. We're also going to keenly watch the developments in global development, seeing what's happening with the UN, and encourage people to continue to do their part. But for more information on how we got to this point and where we hope to go in the coming years, immediately after this presentation, my partner Maureen Bear has a retrospective as well as a future look at the future of SDG counting, as well as our sister organization, Starting Up Good. I believe that I've ended with just a minute or two for questions. And as always, yes, the notebook will be available as soon as I end the presentation. I will send it your way. I wanted to make sure that all of my examples were going to work before I submitted that to the page. So you can look for that there. That's within chat. So there was a question, does this also work with web pages created dynamically like PHP and Python? I actually find that websites that are using PHP as a backend tend to have more human readable CSS classes and actually are usually much better to work with than somebody writing their own website. So yes, but every website is different. This presentation has been in my mind for several years because I think that it's very practical. The downside is that literally every page is going to be written in a different way. Is there something that can be used to pull any existing tags related to the topic of the videos and then add tags to help categorize and find related videos? Yes, if you actually click through, and we did this during the UN General Assembly, if you, after extracting all of the links for the UN videos, if you clicked on each of those links and batch process that, there's also a section that has tags, it has who's speaking at it, it has time frames, it has relevant documents. I just wanted to give a quick overview of how the information can be used. Have I ever tried feeding the page source of to an LLM and prompting it to extract the required information? Yes, I have, and with mixed results. Oftentimes, what I'd be more likely to do is either ask an LLM to extract a table for me, which just in the last, I would say, 6 months, this has become more possible. If you're looking at, say a 12 item table, and you want to be able to turn that into a Excel sheet, the LLMs have definitely gotten strong enough to be able to do that. They're often going to use Python and be a little bit more systematic about it. The data contacts for the custodial agencies that I showed is actually an example where the LLM absolutely could not put together the best way to extract the data, and it required all hand coding. I apologize for kind of rushing through that one, but given that we were looking at hundreds of different contacts, LLMs were not effective at being able to link that together. Okay, so there's a question about being able to identify forms and then fill in that form. Yes. So one of the features of WebExecute is the ability to find an element, click on an element, and then write text. I had a slide that I had to take out due to time that talked about some additional tricks or tips and tricks, and that is something we've done. I have used it in particular to set up a workflow where I log onto a website, I find the username field, I log into it, I find the password field, I fill that in, and then I find the submit button and I click the submit button. And so oftentimes I will end up with a string of code that opens a website, does the login process, does a scrape of information, and then maybe that's extracting links that then batch processes each of those pages. So that would be a regular process for me. Hopefully by now, many of you have moved on to hear the other great presenters here at Wolfram Technology Conference. I have included my email at the end of this presentation, and so I encourage you, if you have questions, if you have interest in the SDGs, maybe how you can also play a role in encouraging global good, feel free to reach out. If you simply have a question about CSS selectors and utilizing the underappreciated WebExecute function, I also encourage you to reach out. So thank you all so much for your time. I do appreciate it. Cheers.